Thank you very much for having me. So, as Sarah said, I'm Chloe. I'm a marine ecologist and social scientist, photographer and sailor, and I use interdisciplinary and collaborative methods to explore how coastal habitats impact people and contribute to community resilience. Hence the seaweed theme. I thought that was more interesting than, I guess, nothing. I don't know if there's anything that relates particularly well to proposal reviews, so I just went for it. Um, and so in my capacity as a consultant, I've worked for the UN Ocean Decade, among other organizations, and I help implement ocean action in support of sustainable development. I've also done a lot of work with local communities in numerous countries, and I'm a big advocate for responsible storytelling, in particular, building reciprocal relationships. I do most of my science communication through writing and public speaking, and across 6 years of volunteering on the UK Polar Network Committee, I have a particular interest in educational outreach and early career development. I've been lucky enough to receive funding from National Geographic Society through a number of different grant programs. I've also received funding from the Environment Agency, the Natural Environment Research Council, APEX, and with the UK Polar Network from organisations like British Antarctic Territory. So I've also reviewed early career or level 1 grants for the National Geographic Society as an external reviewer, but I've also helped to build the review process for the Ocean Decade calls for decade actions, and reviewed submissions as an internal reviewer for that endorsement process. I was also the engagement lead for the DEFRA Ocean Community Empowerment and Nature Fund, also known as Ocean Fund, during its development phase, which was really insightful. And then I recently acted as a grant support officer for the UN Ocean Decade. So that involved developing proposals to respond to government agency funding interests. So that's a bit of background about me. I thought I'd start by sharing some lessons learned through the kind of main 4 review experiences that I've been involved with. And I know we have time for questions at the end of the webinar generally on this topic of proposal review, but if you want to follow up with me afterwards about any of the specific organisations and their opportunities, then please do reach out. So lessons learned in reviewing for National Geographic. I was invited to review level 1 grants, which are their smaller grants geared towards early career researchers. And that's a process that I was familiar with because that's the first grant that I received from them. They've been through numerous iterations of their kind of the logistics of their review process. And in the most recent iteration that I participated in, it was a really simple process. And I really appreciated that. Because they've gone through so many iterations, I've had to deal with a few different technical issues. Sometimes you can even like scroll to see the whole proposal in certain windows. So lesson learned in terms of the technicalities of reviewing can be quite complicated. Helpfully, they provide training for all of their reviewers. And one of the main things that they actually ask you to report on when you submit your review is your own knowledge gaps. So often the request for proposals that they're putting out is quite broad. And so even though they have quite a breadth of knowledge on their external review team, they might not have someone for each project, especially because the projects are likely innovative and haven't been done before. So they ask each reviewer to write a bit of a paragraph about how their knowledge fits the proposal and where they might have gaps. And the other lesson learned from reviewing for National Geographic is really the question, should the funder fund this project, is a very different question to should this project be funded, and trying to step away from whether or not you believe the project should be funded at all and more into the role of, do I believe that this project is a good fit for this organization? Was a really important lesson to learn. The Ocean Decade endorsement process. So I won't give you a full lesson in the Ocean Decade because it's very complex. But the endorsement process is a way for the UN Ocean Decade team to recognize and acknowledge and promote projects and programs and activities that meet the values and mission of the Ocean Decade. So it doesn't come with funding, but it's still a very competitive process and mirrors a lot of funding calls. So that's the first lesson learned, is that you can get review experience even when funding isn't part of that process. And those competitive opportunities don't necessarily have to provide funding for them to be highly competitive. Which, yeah, it was a great experience for me to be part of the development of that process as well. Training reviewers is really important, but it also has to accompany a straightforward process. We found that we'd have individuals gravitate towards different things as being important, even if we hadn't indicated that in the training process. So for whatever reason, in the way that we designed it, or because of personal biases, there were certain things that individual reviewers thought were really important, but they perhaps were not very important to us. So one of the things that we learned was, if there's something that is really important to us, overemphasize that, because otherwise people won't latch on in the same ways that we're gravitating towards that. But if it is kind of balanced importance, and it's really important to get that breadth of interest and backgrounds across your reviewers, because then you kind of mitigate any lopsidedness in the review process. So that was really interesting to learn, certainly a learn through multiple iterations process. And then I thought I'd talk briefly about the kind of grant process within the UN Ocean Decade team, where that team is actually seeking funding for Ocean Decade initiatives and running the coordination unit and things like that, because it happens in a very different way to maybe most research funding development opportunities. So often we're seeking funding from government agencies, and they're quite large funds, and the funders want to be really involved. So there's a bit of a proposal review process that happens in collaboration with the funder. And I found it surprisingly challenging to work with the funder. They obviously have their own goals and aims and hopes for the project. And sometimes they're not always forthcoming about communicating exactly what those might be. And it's a bit of a guessing game, and there's a lot back and forth. And throughout all of that, the goalpost will shift. We definitely learned that with a couple of funders, that you put some things forwards and the feedback comes back, so you adjust it, and then you get more feedback, and it almost goes round in a circle for a while until everyone's happy. But it also introduced me to more structured ways of thinking about theories of change. So thinking about the specific activities and outputs and how they translate into impact. Even that, if that's not explicitly asked for, a lot of funders are looking for that. So it's changed the way that I think about developing proposals as well. And then finally, the DEFRA Ocean Fund. I think one of the biggest lessons learned for me was that you can do everything right and produce a really exceptional proposal, but if you're not the target grantee, then it may not necessarily matter. So I think funders try their best to make sure that the effort that applicants put in is rewarded. But sometimes if you get a rejection, it just has nothing to do with your proposal, and it's really about whether or not you're a good fit for the organization and who they want to be funding. And alongside that, funders don't necessarily know what they want until they see it, or they know exactly what they want, but they don't know how to articulate that and ask for it. And it can be really frustrating, and funders do work hard to try and make sure that they're targeting the right people, so that if you're not the target audience, you're not putting a lot of effort in to get rejection. But sometimes haven't quite got that right. And I think one of the biggest lessons learned for me was that every piece of the grant making puzzle has been a discussed decision, and generally with really good intentions behind it, but those funding opportunities can't be everything to everyone. And so there are naturally some boundaries, and it's a learning curve for everyone. And then just to wrap up quickly, I thought I'd run through kind of top 5 things that I look for in a proposal. So for me, really important, complete answers and application sections. So that's complete sentences. It doesn't have to be perfect writing. And I try really hard to recognize my bias as a English as a first language speaker. It doesn't have to be perfect English, but it does have to be complete and answer the question that's been asked. Ensuring that the project purpose and impact and the method and the budget are justified and make sense together. So is the budget sensible for the methods being proposed and that sort of thing? Because I review early career grants often, I'm looking at leadership potential and the team composition. So if it's an ECR PI, is there enough support within the team to provide any mentorship or training? And do they have that drive and interest in becoming a leader in their field? And then I also look at local collaboration and broader impact considerations. Having worked with a lot of communities, that's really important that there are links to those impacted by the project, and then alignment of values with the fund itself. And then how do I review proposals? So from my perspective, really important to understand what the funder is expecting from me. Are they expecting an essay? Are they expecting scores? Do they want me to answer specific questions, or is it just a yes, no, should we fund this or not, or some combination? I try really hard to stick to the scope and type of review needed. So whether it's substantive reviewing, so is it my kind of area specific expertise that they're after, or is it kind of a logic test? Has the applicant addressed these things in their application? Have they answered the questions fully, rather than the specific content? As I mentioned, identifying my own knowledge gaps is really important for me in that review process. It's one thing to say that they've provided a method section, but if it's not a method that I'm familiar with, then I may not know if the budget is appropriate for that method. And then checking the full review process to see where my review sits in is important as well. So am I the only reviewer? Is there going to be someone to kind of check my biases? And where does it fit in the overall internal, external process is quite important as to how much time I'm going to commit to kind of going through the proposal with a fine-tooth comb or not. And then obviously learn about the funding opportunity in general. What's it trying to achieve, and other projects I'm reviewing relevant to achieving those goals. How do they fit in with that? Is really important as well. And that's it from me. Thanks very much. I don't know if we do questions now or after all 3 presenters. I'm happy either way.
We will have all of the questions at the end. Thank
Great.
you so much for your presentation and information about this. Due to change in our speakers, Bob, would you be willing to speak next?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. So just for a little bit of an intro, next we have Professor Bob Hawley, Program Director, National Science Foundation at the National Science Foundation and at Dartmouth College in the United States. We'll pass it on to you to give more information about yourself and the knowledge you have on this topic. So go ahead, Bob. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. And yeah, as Megan said, my name's Bob, and I have been a professor at Dartmouth for many, many years, more than I'd like to say. I've been reviewing proposals for many, many more years beyond that. And for the last year, I have been playing the role of a program officer at NSF. That's going to end in about another 2 weeks. And so I want to make it very clear that I'm not talking for NSF, although my opinions and things that I have to say are informed by my experience at NSF. None of what I say is official NSF policy and should not be construed as such. So with that disclaimer out of the way, I got started reviewing, I believe, when I was still in graduate school. And I'll circle back to that at the very end when I start talking about how especially early career researchers can get involved in reviewing. I've already just told you where I am now. And most of this is really good because Chloe had some organizations, and most of my organizations don't really overlap with that. And I have a feeling that Martyn is also going to be focusing more on NERC and a European organization. So most of my remarks will focus on National Science Foundation and NASA reviews. I've also reviewed for NERC and some other agencies. I want to also kind of enlarge the spectrum of what we're talking about between what we call NSF ad hoc reviews and panel reviews. So most of the discussion is probably going to be around ad hoc reviews. And this is when an expert is sent a proposal to review and you're like sitting at your computer and you write a bunch of review stuff. Typically, at least at the National Science Foundation, those ad hoc reviews then are sent to a panel. You may be invited to sit on a panel in which, let's say, half a dozen or more folks are invited. They're all sitting in a room together back in the old days, more often than not now, in a virtual room together. And they consider a batch of proposals all at once. And they make use of the ad hoc reviews in making these considerations, but it's a slightly different world. When I get an ad hoc review to do, similar to what Chloe mentioned, and I have a feeling Martyn's going to say the same thing, you got to know what it is your organization wants from you and what their call for proposals are. So again, for the National Science Foundation, most of their requests for proposals are very broad. Let's say we want all your best ideas in Arctic natural sciences. Well, that can cover almost anything. Conversely, NASA has a tendency to have very, very narrowly defined calls. We want proposals from investigators who will be measuring ice shelf processes with the ICESat-2 laser altimeter. So this is, again, not nearly broad, but very, very narrow. So only a small number of people can be responsive to the call. So first, what is the call, understanding what the call is. And as Chloe said, understanding what it is that you're expected to produce. And oftentimes it's useful when you're trying to figure out what you're expected to produce, it's useful to go to whatever web interface they want to send you to so that you can actually see what questions you're going to be asked. Or is it just a free-form essay that you're asked for? Very different things. When I finally get into the meat of a proposal, I've got a slightly different process than I think some people have. I'll start by reading the project summary, which is just a short little, hopefully pithy description of what they're trying to do. But almost immediately after that, I go directly into the budget and the budget justification. And the reason that I do this is that it's really what the proposers are spending money on really indicates what their values are in doing the work of the proposal. So I want to understand what that work looks like and what they're trying to actually do. And then I will go back and understand their background and motivation and justification. And it's just sort of my peculiar order. I have an interest in knowing what this work looks like before I start to ask the question of, okay, why are they asking to do this? I'm writing pretty much the whole time that I'm reading. And then at least for the National Science Foundation, they're requesting strengths and weaknesses. They want to know what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses. NSF in particular asks for the strengths and weaknesses as regards to what they refer to as intellectual merit. In other words, what is the just basic science strengths and weaknesses? And then with regard to broader impacts, in other words, who cares about doing this science? I always like to try and let it sit for a little bit. And I put right in the headline there, but I didn't mention it, but providing adequate time. Many of us are terrible at this. I'm not that great at it. Often we'll end up scheduling, let's do this review while I'm flying to one place or another. But providing adequate time for review is something that just try to build that time in. And then you want this writing to be good writing. So good writing is rewriting. So you want to be able to revise it, edit, and proofread it. So when somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, will you review this for me?" One of my some of these points are colored by my experience as a program officer. Respond as quickly as you can. Say yes or no. Program officers would much rather hear a very quick no than wait for a week or more to hear that, oh, I'm not really sure. We need to get these proposals reviewed is fundamentally what we need to do, and therefore finding another reviewer. Sometimes it's very difficult for us to find reviewers. Considering conflict of interest, again, different agencies vary. The National Science Foundation has one of the strictest conflict of interest policies that I've ever experienced. For example, you won't be able to review any proposal where you've been a co-author on anything in the last 5 years with somebody. Anybody from your institution, you'll never be able to review. Lots of different pieces of it. If you have a concern about it, email the program officer and say, hey, this is what I think. You know, if this person is your best friend, that might not be a technical conflict of interest according to NSF, but they may say, well, can you give an honest review of this? And if the answer is yes, that might be fine. Other agencies, I think, are much less strict about these conflicts. Thinking about your level of experience on the project, I think that it's important to recognize your knowledge gaps, but also, especially for an early career researcher, recognize that you know more than you think you know. You come out of a PhD so frequently thinking that you know everything there is to know about this tiny little thing, and then there's nothing else in your knowledge space, but that's totally not true. And so, remember that you actually know more than you think, and also that it's up to the PI of the proposal to actually make you understand the science. It's not necessarily on you to understand it in the face of difficult language, let's say. Not all proposals need every reviewer to understand every part of the proposal. Some proposals are very complicated, and so if there's a piece of the proposal that you don't understand, that's probably okay. And it may well be that the program officer chose you for your expertise in this corner of the proposal. And so if there's another corner that you're feeling like, I don't really understand, it's okay to say that to the program officer. It's even okay to put that in your review. But remembering that when we choose reviewers, we look you up. We look at what your expertise is. We look at what you've published, and we've chosen you for a reason. So try not to let imposter syndrome stop you from saying yes to a review. So just a sort of a few sort of scattershot thoughts that I have put together kind of as a final slide of this, and some of this is stuff that we say to panels as well when we gather panels together. Like I said earlier, review the call. Use the full range of ratings. This is NSF, for example, has ratings from 1 through 5, and it is very difficult to grade inflation. I'll put it this way: grade inflation is a thing not only in undergraduate education but also in proposal ranking, and it just makes the program officer's job more difficult when all of the proposals are clustered right near the top. This next one's really important, and we always say review the proposal in front of you, not the proposal you wish was in front of you. We've all, maybe not all, but many of us have read proposals from really great people that just aren't the best proposal. And you need to make sure that you're not just looking at who this proposer is and saying, oh, they're going to do great work no matter what they've said on this proposal. You actually have to review what they've written and what they want to read. This is an interesting case for double-blind proposals, which we can double-blind review, which we can talk about. I've been involved in that a couple of times. Another mistake some reviewers make will be to say, they'll say, hey, this proposal was excellent. And then what they'll do in their review is fix all of the mistakes that they've found in the proposal. So again, the proposal in front of you. If you're gonna rate something highly, you need to have evidence for that rating. If you're gonna rate something low, you're gonna have to have evidence for that. In other words, your ranking or rating has to be consistent with the actual evidence that you found as strengths or weaknesses. And the key point in this is whoever it is that is actually making the final call on this proposal wants to use your review as evidence for why they made this call. So putting yourself in that program officer's shoes is very helpful, because they're going to be essentially arguing for or against this proposal to whoever's next in the chain. Just in terms of the language you use, remember that you're commenting on the proposal, you're not commenting on the PI. This may help you if you have critical things to say and you don't want to be mean, right? Don't be mean. Be polite, be constructive, and try to make your comments as specific as possible. And finally, nobody wants to look at their review and see typos and incorrect grammar, because then that makes them feel like whoever was reviewing their proposal was not actually paying attention. So just always make sure that none of that stuff slips into your review. Finally, I think one of the questions was asked about like how early career researchers can get involved. And so one of the ways that I've often helped early career people get involved is, let's say I'm asked to review a proposal, but I haven't got an enormous amount of time. I can train one of my graduate students or one of my mentees to help. Again, this is something that I do with the concurrence of the program officer. This is something that works really well because, as Chloe mentioned, it is useful to be able to know how to review, training for reviewing. And so having some mentoring in reviewing is a useful thing. The other thing is to talk to funding agencies. We as program officers are always looking for reviewers. So you can talk to your program officers, whoever it is that runs the kinds of proposals that you might be an expert in. And you know, they can put you in their little black book of people to contact. And in fact, I've got these two QR codes are for essentially signing up at NSF to review. So within NSF, we have some internal tools, databasing tools to try and find reviewers. And so if you can get yourself on those lists, then you can get yourself into that system and then become asked for reviews more and more. And then finally, the panel, if you can get yourself on a panel, this is a really, really great experience, both for reading lots of different proposals, but also for hearing a lot of really, really smart people talking about these different proposals and weighing the strengths and weaknesses. It's probably one of the best, I think it's probably one of the best science discussions I've ever had, in that this is a conversation about really cool new ideas. It's a conversation that has consequences because some of these ideas are going to get funded and some of them will not. And it's a conversation that I think everybody in the room takes extremely seriously. So especially for an early career researcher, it's fantastic. And early career researchers have probably a leg up in getting into a panel because of the conflict of interest rules at NSF. The earlier you are in your career, the fewer collaborators you have dragged along potentially. And so you might be more eligible to be on panels. So I think I will stop there. That's it for me. And I'll leave the QR code up for a second in case anybody wants to clip it.
Great. Thank you so much, Bob. I think that was really insightful. So as mentioned previously, we will take all of our questions at the end, and I think we will have a good amount of time for discussion. So as a reminder, you can throw questions into the chat and somebody will be monitoring those during our Q&A period at the end, or during that session, you can come off mute and share your question yourself. But in the meantime, we have our last panelist, Professor Martyn Tranter, and he's a polar biogeochemist from Aarhus University in Denmark. Hopefully I pronounced that okay. And he's a long-standing supporter of the UK Polar Network, and so we're really happy to have him here. And I'll turn it over to you, Martyn.
Thank you very much. Let me just double check. Here we go. Can you all see this, please?
We can't see your slides quite yet.
Okay. Can you see them now, please?
No, we cannot.
Okay. Hey, that's a great start.
That's okay, we have time.
You are the screen sharing. No, I don't want that.
Now we
Is it
can see.
Pardon?
We can now see your slides.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much. You can see I'm a master of all this modern technology. So I'd just like to thank Chloe and Bob. They've given a great introduction to the reviewing process, how you go about doing a review, and what happens with the fruits of your labours when the reviews come to the panels. We're all saying, rather similar things, but with a slightly different take on what we've been asked to do. And I was reflecting, with all the grant reviewing I do, with all the paper reviewing I do, I can't remember ever giving a seminar on grant reviewing. I've learned everything by osmosis and talking to people. So I think this is a great idea. And I'm so pleased already that some of the things I do are shared by Bob and Chloe. So I thought there's far too much text here, but Solly asked us to say something about our reviewing journey, how we got to where we are, and what type of reviewing we do at the moment. And to me, grant reviewing is sort of intimately tied up with reviewing papers, and it's the kind of part of your academic journey that normally, sometime during your PhD, your PhD advisor will say, "Hey, I've got this really interesting paper. Take a look at this to review. What do you think about it?" Many of our research habits were inculcated in us by our PhD supervisor, and my supervisor's on my shoulder at the moment now, telling me stick to the script and get moving. I started paper reviewing with my PhD supervisor. When I moved on to my postdoc, that's the first time I cut my teeth with reviewing grant applications. And I speak as an old white guy, and this was 40 years or so ago. And it's great that Bob is going out there, actively trying to recruit volunteers. It took me some time before I independently reviewed a grant application. But the thing I got from my PhD supervisor and my postdoc PIs is that you carry a responsibility for the subject when you do both paper reviews and grant reviews. You have to be respectful for the hopes and aspirations of the authors. That they're people just like yourselves who desperately want a paper published. They definitely want a grant funded, and they put a lot of time and effort and emotional energy into these papers and grant applications. And I've tried my best. I'm not perfect. I've tried my best always to remember that you're the gatekeeper for the subject when you're doing your reviews, and I take that responsibility very seriously. I had the privilege of working with Barry Lyons from Ohio State University, and one thing he said to me is, "Mark, always park your ego when you're reviewing. just treat the authors like you would want to be treated yourself. Forget who they are. Don't try to be cleverer. Just try to give a balanced, honest account of what you read and what you think about it. No paper, let alone any grant application, is perfect. Your main job is to make sure that there's nothing fundamentally in the work that you're fundamentally wrong with in the work that you're reading, and then go with the application, go with the paper, and see what it takes you. I'll say in a moment, you go with your gut about whether what you think the quality of the paper and grant application is. So I guess back in the day, I guess it was a year or so after my first paper was published that I was asked to review a paper independently. And then it took a while after that until I got my first grant. And I reckon it was about 2 years or so. And your name is on the circuit because of your papers and because you've got a grant. And then the grant agencies get to learn about you and they ask you to start reviewing. And I took that to be a huge honor and privilege when I was younger. I still do. I try to review, even though I'm coming up to retirement. I still try to review about 2 papers a month, and I continue to review grants. And this happens on a lumpy basis now, but on average, I guess I would review about 12 grant applications a year. Bob mentioned get onto a panel if you can. And in 1986, I was invited onto a US EPA review panel on acid deposition to snowpacks, and it was just a fantastic experience. You rub shoulder with the gods in your subject, and they actually listen to what you say, and they evaluate whether what you say is nonsense or has got some content. And again, I try to make sure now when I sit on panels that I try to be as supportive as I can of younger people sitting on the panel for the first time, because it is quite a nerve-wracking experience. Most of what I'm going to talk to you about is UK NERC NUC grant applications. And since 2008, I've been on the formal peer review college. So you get about 6 applications a year to review with that. And since 2011, I've been on I've been a core review panel member. So I sit on maybe 1 or 2 panels every year. And you go from standard grants to large grants to special topics, thematic grants, research fellowships. And I sat on grant applications for graduate schools. These are block grants of PhD students for 5, 8 years. And again, it's a fantastic experience. I've also reviewed for NSF, NSERC, and I've just you can read these as well as I can, and I've sat on 3 Norwegian panel agencies. I'm sorry I didn't proofread the last Norwegian properly. Right, so how an ad hoc grant application comes through email. It's in my area. I'm going to I accept the review. What do I do first? I look at the call information, and I'm particularly interested in the type of work that's looking to be funded, and the type of outcomes that the call is expecting. I want to know how much can be applied for, or what's the size of the grant and over what period. And then I look to see if there are any preferences from the funding agencies. For example, collaboration with Inuits, for example. And then the next thing I do is I look at the grade or the recommendation definitions. And it's something that Chloe said. It's trying to work out what you're being asked to do. Is it a 0 to 6 scale? Is it the 0 to 10 scale? And I look at the definitions to give me an idea of the sorts of things that should be and often aren't in the application. And I'm also tuned in for the words that are in the different grade recommendation definitions. And I'll show you some examples of NERC grades and definitions in a moment. And a big thing then is that you make sure that the words you write in your commentary are consistent with the grade definitions that you were marking to, if you will. Now I've done my homework. Now I can read the application. And normally I go through the application quite quickly, and I read about the work being proposed, and I wonder, does this excite me? Does it meet the core criteria? Will it make a big impact in the core area? Would I want to read the papers that are going to come out of the work? And then I kind of listen to my gut reaction, and I think, wow, that's exciting. I like this. So after I've done a quick read, then I look at what the overarching objective is. Usually there's a hypothesis or an overall aim, and I check that fits in with one of the main objectives of the core. The next thing then that there are usually some subsidiary aims and objectives, and the first thing I ask myself, is this sensible? Do these follow from trying to understand the main overarching objective of the application? And I read and I ask myself, can these subsidiary aims be achieved by the methodology described in the time frame that's allowed and with the available budget? And then I ask myself, is there enough time at the end of the project to be able to synthesize all that's been done and then write up the grant deliverables, which could include reports, which often include papers. And the final thing I do is double check that all the core criteria have been met. A bit like Bob, my habit now is when I write up the feedback I'm going to give, and when I justify the grade I'm going to give, I try to take my time. I don't do it. I read it. I have a feeling. I give the grade, bang, on to the next one. I seldom do that now. I take my time. I rough out my feedback and the justification for the grade I'm going to give, and then I sleep on it, and I'm a big believer. If you think in the morning what you decide, on the heat of the occasion, in the afternoon, evening, whenever you're doing the reviewing the application, I think you're probably going to be comfortable with the grade that you're given. I've made notes on the application about what I liked and then what I'm not so sure about. And particularly in NERC like balanced applications. They like you to talk about about all the good things in the application, of course, but they also like you to question whether some areas of the application could have maybe been explained a little better, or there may be some problems with the methodology that could be fixed, for example. And I use these notes to rough out my commentary. And again, as Chloe has said, in line with what's requested of me by the funding agency. And then after I've done this roughed out commentary, I let it settle, you know, at least overnight. I follow up by rereading the parts that I don't like, and I kind of double check then that I haven't misunderstood what the authors are writing, and that I haven't been too critical. And you know, a conscious bias is sometimes I think I can be too harsh, and I like to kind of dampen that you know, the bad mark inside of me down before I settle on my final grade. I rewrite my initial draft then. Good writing is rewriting. I totally endorse that maxim. And I always try to include supportive, encouraging commentary. So I always like to say there are things I really like about the application, blah 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 blah. And then no application is perfect, so there are some negative. You know, I'll almost always have some negative comments, but what I think is that in the NERC system, where the PIs can respond back to the commentary that they're giving by reviewers like myself. If I think that the authors just haven't quite got enough space, or they haven't just quite hit the mark with explaining something, my negative comment will be, if you will, an opportunity for the PIs to explain and express something that maybe is not so good in the application. So my negative comments, I hope, are opportunities for the authors to put their points across in their responses. And the final thing then I do is I check my commentary is consistent with the grade or recommendation. I'm not going to talk to this dense slide. You know, it's there. You can read it back in the recording should you wish, but you'll be given a set of things that you should be looking out for in the application, and you check that most of these are present in particular applications. You're asked to oftentimes you're asked to comment on whether the applicant and the team are capable of delivering the work. And then the assessment process, NERC are very big on this, very supportive of early career scientists. And there's a note here that we should be respectful of early career researchers. And the grades. At the moment, the discovery grants are reviewed in two stages. So the first is a kind of 0 to 6 scale. To be in the funding frame, the application must be at least, you know, a 4, and oftentimes a 5 and a 6. And for me to justify an excellent application and give a 5 grade, I've got to say something about the very high quality of the work. The excellent level of detail, and the weaknesses that I identify have only got to be very minor. And you can see as you go down the grading scale, you can see that the endorsement of the application gets more and more moderate as you go down. But you can't say, for example, this is a very good application and then give the score as 6, for example. So each of the review panel members independently on the discovery panels that I sit on reviews maybe 6, maybe 8 applications, and we grade from 1 to 6 using the full scale. Usually it's somewhere between 3 to 6. And then we meet together and we work out what we collectively think the first 30 applications are by their initial grade. And then we write our responses. We collectively write our responses together, and the 4 people who've reviewed the application. They go back to the authors. Back come the responses, and on the basis of the commentary, the authors have made back to us, and given our collective current reading of the original applications, then we move over onto a 1 to 10 score. And just at the moment, you have to be a very good 8. On the panels I've sat on to be in the funding frame. Otherwise, there is some grade inflation, and the 9s are usually funded, and 10s are the exception. And the thing here is that even an excellent, which might be out of the funding window, the application strongly meets all the assessment criteria. A very good application, which will probably miss out, has only some minor weaknesses or limitations. And there's almost always a very, very good constructive review of the collective comments of the 4 panel members and the responses of the PIs. And by and large, everybody is trying to give the best account of the application as they could, mindful that it's a competition, and for example, of 30 applications or so, maybe only 5, 6, 7, 8 can be funded. So it's a competition, and unfortunately, there are always going to be more losers than winners. If you hold that opinion that getting a grant means that you're a winner. So anyway, that's how I go about it. That's my kind of mindset, and I hope you found some of that useful. And myself, and I'm sure the other panelists, would be welcome to take any questions that you might have.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you to all of our speakers for such insightful and useful information in this process. I had one question just to get things started, and this can be to anybody. I've always been curious about why there isn't more double-blind review of proposals, and wouldn't that help some of the conflict of interest issues and barriers for reviews or for building like review panels? So whoever wants to jump in.
I can jump in to start with, because I'm a big proponent of double-blind review myself. And so I've had some conversations about that with, in particular, folks at NSF. And I think that it's actually exactly the concern that you mentioned, the COI issue, that more often than not, well, I won't say more often than not, but it is very, very common for NSF systems to not end up identifying a COI. Then I ask somebody to review, and they say, actually, I have a COI with this proposer. And so I think that for that reason alone, NSF is unlikely to do that. Just because they want to, and I'll just say that from my experience of being on double-blind review panels multiple times in the past, in many cases, you can actually absolutely tell who it is that's written this proposal. They may cite themselves all the time. In one case, in fact, the proposer had stripped their names out of everything that you could see in the main body of the PDF document, but their name was still in the sort of outline if you clicked on the little outline in your preview. So it's sort of, it is still very helpful in that with a double-blind review, the mentality of the reviewer is much, much more about the proposal than about the person. And one interesting thing I found in at least one of these panels is we were consistently rating the proposals lower than when we were talking about PIs and people, when we were just talking about the projects themselves. So I think, I don't know, it may be that there is a way to get NSF on board with that. I know that NASA has definitely done quite a bit more of that. I don't know about the UK or other European organizations.
Yeah, the all the time I've been on it, we haven't gone down that route, and the conversation comes up periodically, and the difficulty there is that you can often guess who the PIs are. You need information about the the place they are and the facilities they've got, and so the kind of the double blind element is kind of at best at best, yeah, it's opaque, and so I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how I'd go about instigating a truly double-blind reviewing system, because you would kind of know, and you would guess that there's only certain places that can do this type of work.
Yeah, I think that's true. And although I think that even if it doesn't fully work, it can be at least a statement to the reviewers that, hey, we want you not to care who this is. We want you not to say, oh, well, this is the most brilliant person I've ever read ever before. And so even though this proposal isn't that great, they're going to do good work, which may be true, but it doesn't mean that they should get funded.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really great to hear those perspectives. A follow-up statement, I think more than a question, is that I feel like I've heard reports of, because the PI is known and well known, especially if they're an established position in their careers, those tend to get funded more over people who are earlier in their careers and like trying to break into the funding world. So I have been very interested in the fact that there's not more double-blind reviewing. So thank you for sharing some insight on that. I will hand it over to Neosha, who's going to manage the Q&A session. So over to you, Neosha.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Please feel free to type any questions that you have into the chat, or go ahead, unmute yourself, raise your hand. We have about 18 more minutes in the Zoom call, and so we have plenty of time to ask more questions if you have any for the panelists. Okay, someone asked, can you please highlight some major and frequent mistakes which you usually find during the proposal review?
The clarifying question, the mistakes in the reviewers that the reviewers make, is that the question? Not mistakes in proposals.
I mean the mistakes in the proposal. Yes. Sometimes when you review the proposal, so sometimes you found a common mistakes that you found, okay, I have reviewed a proposal before, so I found the same mistake in the previous proposal, and this mistake has been repeated by another proposal. So if you just wanted to highlight for the early career researchers, so it would be very helpful for us. Thank you very much.
I think from my perspective, often the thing that I'm flagging as a weakness in proposals is not answering the question or not actually addressing the section, which can be really hard to do. And I think, having been on the design end of review processes and putting out calls, it's something that I'm trying to course correct and provide a bit more guidance about what should be included in that section. But I have reviewed proposals before where I get to the end and I'm like, well, ostensibly they have put words in each of these sections, but I don't know what this project is. And that to me is the biggest weakness, is there's no like clear, even if it's an elevator pitch somewhere in the summary that synthesizes what it is that's being proposed, if it doesn't have that, then it's really difficult to say one way or the other if it's a good project, because the sum of its parts hasn't been effectively communicated. So that's the biggest thing for me. If I get to the end of a proposal and I can't work out what the project is, if I couldn't explain it in a few sentences, then there are some issues with the proposal. And I find that typically it comes down to kind of the ways in which the different sections link to one another, I guess. So it's the thoroughness of the answers, but also the ways in which they link together. If it's not obvious how the method serves the broader impacts that have been discussed and things like that. Yeah, that's from my perspective. But I have to say, as someone who's designed, is now much more at the forefront of my mind as to how you communicate to potential applicants what you're expecting and what a complete application looks like, providing that guidance, especially if the reviewers keep coming up with the same weaknesses and proposals. It's probably indicative of the way in which the application form or the request for proposals has been put to applicants.
Yeah, I have something I tell my my students and postdocs is if I have to work hard to understand what you're trying to do, then I work, you hurt. You're not going to get a good grade from me. And it's this awful thing about the narrative. You're telling a story through the grant application, and it hasn't got to be too complicated. And it's got to be something that a broad spectrum of like-minded scientists can easily understand. So that often I see a fault I often see in the grant applications I review is the big picture is not there. It's, why is this work really important? Why is this particular subject very important? What's an impediment to moving the subject on at the moment? Well, it's this particular problem. Hey, and I know how to fix that problem. That's the narrative that you're trying to tell in the first paragraph. And if you have to wait till the third or fourth paragraph to understand what's going on and why you're doing it, then you've lost the reviewer, and you've smashed up the back end of your application. So it's this idea of important subject, currently of great interest. An impediment to moving the science on or the subject forward is blah blah blah. And hey, this application shows you how to do just that. And here's what we're going to do. Boom. If I had to caricature a NERC discovery grant.
One thing I would piggyback on top of that as well is, if you think of it as fundamentally, you have to show that there is a gap, and this is the way to solve that and plug that gap. But then also you have to show, and I can do that. And so the last thing I think people often fall down on is identifying what needs to be done, but without giving any evidence that the proposed team can actually do that. Whether that's existing publications that the team has already written, whether that's facilities and equipment that the team has, whether that's a sufficient description of the technique that the reviewer can say, okay, I understand that this person understands how it's done.
Yeah. I agree, Bob. And I tell you what, the Brits are, they undersell themselves somewhat. I can write it for other people, but I can't write that about myself. And so I ask my I ask friends or you know, trusted colleagues to do that bit for me, because I just, you know, that's not me. But you have to do it. You know, if you believe in the subject, you believe in the piece of work that you're doing, then you have to say, I can do the job, or my team can do the job. That's how I depersonalize it as best I can.
And sometimes it's just a matter of having sufficient detail in that method section. You might have to get into the weeds. I often, with my proposals, will have a section that's just detailed methods, where there'll be an overview of the method so that people that understand that I know how to do this can see what I'm doing. And then if people don't know whether I know how to do it, then they can read, here's what I'm really going to do down in the weeds. But something that an experienced reviewer could easily skip if they wanted to.
Great, thank you for these answers. We have another question in the chat. I guess I can read it out loud. It's Alexis says, I have reviewed one proposal. I found the main question super important for the community. The method in itself was clear, but the results that would be obtained wouldn't necessarily answer the main questions. And so the question is, like, how would you rate a proposal like this?
Well, regrettably, in the NERC system, I would have to say that there was a significant weakness if it was that strong, and then a significant weakness. I would look down the grade list, and you know, come to a 4 or a 5, for example. I haven't got the score sheet in front of me, but the only honest thing I can do as a reviewer, if I think it's a significant weakness, is to grade it in that way. But if there's a right of reply from the authors, I would say, you know, I love the area that the proposal is working in. You know, seems to be a really good team of perhaps younger people doing this work. You know, they're well mentored by the lead PI. Something that was not so well explained in the application is what the output was, and what use that will be for the broader community. And I'd be grateful for the you know, for the PI team to respond to this more negative comment.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, certainly with funders like the National Geographic Society, community impact is really important. And so if it's not articulated how the specified results feed into outputs for the community, then that is a major weakness for many funders who are steering more towards locally relevant and impactful research. So I suppose it depends if there's another section that articulates why they've explained the results if they have, and if that sufficiently explains why maybe in this case the results don't appear to answer the main question, but perhaps for the community that they're working in, those expected results are the kinds of outputs that are useful. But if they haven't provided that, and if it, I think, again, goes back to the narrative, if the narrative doesn't make sense, then it's really difficult to fully review the proposal, and it is hard to say, oh, the concept is great, but this specific application hasn't provided enough detail and enough information about the narrative, so it can't be funded as it is. Yeah.
The other thing that this, I feel like, illustrates is why it's really important that you have a narrative in your review that substantiates what your grading is. And the great part about that is that it could be that remember, you're not reviewing this in a vacuum. There may be other reviewers that will also be reviewing the same question. It could be that this is actually a gap in your knowledge. And so you might say, wow, this is an incredible question. The methods are totally great, but there's a big gap, like you say, between these measurements and the question. In the event that that is a knowledge gap and you downgrade it because of that, other reviewers will have differing opinions on that, and you will have written, this is the main reason why I changed my ranking on this. So that will give a lot of context for whoever the program officer or the decision maker is, whether they weight that part of your review most heavily or not most heavily.
Mm-hmm. And just for reassurance, in the panels I've been on, where there's if you will, a slight outlier opinion among the the 3, 4, 5 reviewers, then that the outlier is asked to having listened into the discussion by the other reviewers, whether they want to revise their opinion. And you'd be surprised how many times people say, I've got that wrong. I've misunderstood. Sometimes they'll dig their heels in if they know quite a lot about it. But they will, if one bad review doesn't kill your application, the committee will will look at the relative strengths and weaknesses of the reviews and test whether the more negative review has got substance. I'll just echo, get on a panel if you can. It's a great experience. And they used to say that, people used to say in the NERC system that, you start to becoming better at getting your own grants funded because you're a committee member and you got friends and all the rest of it who will give you good grades. That's just not the case. It's that you see a bunch of really good applications and you know what works, and you know how to put a story together, and then you know how the process works after the reviews are in. And for those of you in the audience, and again, it's what I tell my own students, that if you can get hold of the reviewing information from the funding agency for the call that you're dealing with, then you know what the panel are looking for, and you make sure that when you craft your application, you make sure that you say all the things that, or you include all the elements that the reviewers are going to score you on, and that really does bump your grading up somewhat.
Great. Thank you so much for these wonderful answers. We have about 3 minutes left, so we could take one more quick question. If we have no more questions,
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, yeah, please go ahead.
Another question. What about the differences in the culture between some countries that will tend to oversell their measurements and their method and the question, and others that will downsize the importance of their results?
Yeah, if I can start off, it's after you've done a reasonable amount of reviewing, you get to pick up, the way that, say, a Scandinavian would write a grant application relative to a Brit, relative to a North American, and you start to read between the lines. So there are definitely different styles of writing applications, and it's one of the nice things of reviewing around the world. And on most panels, there'll be sufficient experience to be able to guide you about I don't want to do parodies in case I get into trouble, but you know, they might be a very flat. This is a very, very good review. You know, it gets my my full and utmost support, and they've given the application, say, a 4 or 5 on the 10 scale, and you know the culture of that review has come from, and you immediately think, wow, that's stellar compared to some of the others that are from you know, from that particular area. So usually the panel chair has got a lot of experience and will help guide you as to the review style, and indeed the grant application style of you know, the different cultures who are contributing to the committee.
I think most application forms or formats that are requested also have the way in which they're put together builds in kind of backup measures, right? So if someone can articulate really strongly their research aims, their methods, their intended outputs, then that's a good indication of that individual's capabilities, even if they're not good at selling themselves, as it were. So there are always going to be a few different metrics you can use as you're reading the application. And certainly from the Ocean Decades endorsement processes, those are highly international. We get applications from people of all career stages, all sectors, all disciplines, and many nationalities. And some of the worst applications have come from English speakers in the UK or the US who are senior scientists. And if that maybe for whatever reason, maybe they think that they're a shoo-in, but it all balances out. I've never read an application in that process, which is one of the more culturally diverse processes, that has been questioned or rejected because of cultural differences. And it is, I mean, I have read applications that I'm like, oh, this is a very different culture towards the science that they're doing. But I think, yeah, there are always different mechanisms with which to assess the kind of content and the team leading it and the competencies of that application, the language and cultural barriers notwithstanding.
Yeah,
Great.
and I think when you come to the end of the application, you look to see what the group have achieved, and sometimes even though the text might be slightly flatter than you know, some, you know, really hyperbolic text that you read occasionally, it's, can I understand what they're trying to do, and do I think what they've done is really, really good, and you know, it's what you're going to do, and how you're going to do it is important to me, not the selling necessarily at the beginning of the application.
Okay, thank you so much. I think with that, we should begin to wrap up. Thank you so much to our 3 wonderful speakers, Chloe, Bob, and Martyn, for sharing your expertise in these subjects. Just a reminder, Megan has pasted a few links into the chat to get more information about USAPECS and the UK Polar Network, the organizations that have hosted this webinar, and also to share the link to the recording, which you can save. You can also follow USAPECS and the the UK Polar Network on YouTube to find these recordings as well. Again, thank you to our panelists, and thank you all for coming. Hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Yeah. Bye.